So welcome back to Third Age Reforged, and a bit of a change of pace from the new game modes and the sieges, the larger scale sieges that I've been showing lately. I'm going to be doing a good old-fashioned free-for-all today on, I believe this map is called the North Downs, and it's not just a flat map, which is why I'm showing this one. There's a lot of terrain features. There's obviously these little divots in the land, as well as the cliffs that you can't pass through. There's also quite a lot of trees, so there's a potential for ambushes, particularly for armies which start with a lot of trees in their deployment zone. For example, it looks as though the army up in the top corner there from Eclipse 2500 has decided to deploy mainly in the trees that he was afforded. But we'll start off with the player who sent me this battle, and he is going to be playing as Umbar, and it's going to be HD 1080p from DF, so that's nice. And Umbar, of course, very survivable, quite a tanky faction generally. They may lack a little bit in terms of ranged well, their archers are not exactly the most damaging at range, but they are very tough to bring down in a pure skirmish fight, and they do have some pretty nasty tools elsewhere in their army as well. So obviously some Balagaya archers at the front, which are a very good frontline archer. They tend to work in much the same way as the Gondorian or basic Dalian archers do, in that they are there to absorb arrow fire more so than dishing out the punishment, kind of the opposite to what you would expect from the lower tier elves with their lower armor values. And just in here we can see a pretty classic front line from Umbar, a mixture of the Balagaya halberds with those AP pole arms which afford a phalanx, and of course mixed in we can see the Castamir's Legion, which are one of the strongest mainline infantry units that you can mass up, as I've said many times before. Very, very strong, but they are also very expensive to mass up, and if Umbar do go for the full complement of Castamir's Legion, which it does look as though HD 1080p has done so here, you do have to make sacrifices elsewhere in your army. He does also have a couple of units of the crossbow corsairs, which are a very useful tool for Umbar. They're not good in a skirmish fight, but the fact that they can hide means they don't often have to engage in a skirmish fight. You can reveal them only when needed, and they make a very good tool for zoning out cavalry as a result of that. It's very difficult to catch Umbar unawares, completely undefended, against, well, to cavalry charges when you have plentiful crossbow corsairs on hand. Also the Corsair Blackguards, which is a similar story here. If archers see them, they are obviously going to get focused down because of their lack of a shield, but they can hide, and they make pretty good makeshift dual-wielding infantry, as well as being obviously very effective javelins. And the final units that he has brought, he's gone for a cavalry contingent, obviously the Numenorian Lancers, a very effective shock cavalry unit, and then the Warlords of Umbar, Umbar's Knight unit, a very good all-around cavalry, and this is of course where Umbar's General is going to be hiding out. And I think that's just about it from the Umbar army, so pretty classic all things considered as far as an Umbar army goes. Maybe you would expect to see a little bit more in terms of their archer forces, and maybe only one unit of crossbow corsairs normally. But in a situation like this where you can use choke points to your advantage, the high DPS that crossbows can dish out might be a good thing. Meanwhile over here we can see Eclipse 2500 is playing as Cardlan. He's got a lot of his forces in the trees over here, and naturally as Cardlan you're going to see quite a lot of these tar pit units, the Greenwatch Garrison Spearmen. Very bad in melee. I think they only have an attack score of 1, of course, with the Spear Malice on top of that, meaning their abilities against infantry are not very good. However, they do have an anti-cavalry bonus, which is obviously nice, and also they're very cheap, and they form a very nice tar pit, as I was saying, against enemy archers, which means Umbar are going to have to be... Looks as though Umbar and Cardlan will probably come into contact with one another first, we'll see. The opposite to that is, of course, the Greenwatch Garrison Footmen, which are the Pikes. They're very bad under arrow fire. But they are also cheap. You can mass them up very nicely, and this means that Cardlan have got a very nasty phalanx, particularly when they are combined with these guys, the Wardens of Tir and Gorthad. They can inspire the nearby troops around them, which is important for Cardlan. Cardlan don't have the highest morale, and they do need these buffer units to keep their troops fighting for the amount of time necessary. And obviously we've got some Dunedain captains over here again. Very similar to General's going to be in here, the King of Cardlan, and similar in kind of unit class to the Elisar's Vanguard or the Haven Guard. They are an important part of Cardlan in the same way that the Wardens of Tir and Gorthad are, to buff your units, your other lower tier units, to keep them in the fight for longer. But you do need to be careful because they are one of the very few Cardlan units which have high skill. A lot of Cardlan's units are very dependent on their armour to survive. Over here we can see the Miniscarithlan Swordsman, which is obviously very much in this vein, armoured mainline infantry. Similar story with the Spearmen, and obviously with the Spears, heightened mass but less killing power. And a Trebuchet, which on this map, it looks open, but again, as I've said, there's several choke points which could be utilised. We'll see if Cardlan can make that work for them. In the south over here, we can see that Imladris is here, Dreezy of the Dark Cloud. And we can see that the Imladris Sentinels are here, nice spear cavalry unit. And over here we can see the Gwathi Rogdor, the High Elven Knight, so it'll be interesting to see which knights will come out on top in this battle. We've got the general here. And then Imladris' main army, which is... Imladris seem to be the furthest away, or at least they occupy the south portion of the map, so they might be able to hang back a little bit and use that to their advantage. A couple of units of Eldar Enway Haru Hatal at the front, a couple of units of them, that's pretty expensive, a big investment there. As well as a couple of units of Eldar Enway Haru Masil, and then 2 units of Imladris Guardians with the armor upgrade. This is a huge investment in this infantry here. And then over here we can see 2 units of Eldar Enway Haru Quinga, and then a unit of Eldar Enway Haru Myros. This is an incredibly elite Imladris army, but it is also a very small Imladris army. We shall see if this works out for him. He does also have this area which he can camp up here if things do go south with his very small army. And the final army on the field is going to be Selva, who's going to be playing as Dol Amroth, and Dol Amroth seems to have gone more infantry heavy than they normally do. And on the front line we can see he's got some Ethelond men-at-arms, or Ethelond men-at-arms. They do have the armour upgrade as well, although they aren't as good as the Castamir's Legion on the front line. They are still better than the average infantry unit, I want to say. Obviously they can only have 1 armour upgrade, which does put them at a bit of a disadvantage to their Gondorian and Arthurdane brethren. But even so, they won't steer you far wrong on the front line, especially not when they're backed up by pole arms like this, the Dorano and Pikemen. They have the armour upgrade as well, making them just a little bit more tanky. More pole arms in the Ethelond Halberdiers, and then slightly more elite tier units in these Tirithea Wardens. Obviously still not the best in terms of killing power, but in terms of holding a line, potentially very useful. Some Haven Guard over on this side with the General, so he's going to be on foot today. Some Talon Knights, and then the cavalry contingent, which you're obviously going to see with Dol Amroth. We can see some Knights of the Silver Swan, and then some Swan Knights, so some melee cavalry. No Haven Knights, however, which is rare. Most of the time when I've seen Dol Amroth, they've always had the Haven Knights. This does put them in an interesting position, but let us begin. Obviously, Dol Amroth surrendering the... Well, they do still have their Swan Knights, which are probably still the strongest single unit of pure melee cavalry on the field. But they would still struggle against the Knights that are on display if the Knights get a nice charge. We shall see. We can see over here that Cardland are immediately moving to try and get onto the higher ground over here, whereas Umbar are actually surrendering that to move into the low ground. That could be a problem for them if Cardland decides to try and focus down Umbar with their Trebuchet. Trebuchet is a big investment in an open field, well, a more open field battle like this, because obviously it can be quite wildly inaccurate, and it is very expensive as well. We'll see if that turns out to be a good move. It's a big risk on the part of Cardland to have such a thing. Ah, I recognise this map now. This has been used for a scenario before. A big settlement was placed here. As it is, we are now on a more open field. I'm not sure if Umbar knows quite what to do here. They were going to go down into the lower ground, but they've now changed their mind and they're going to go back up here onto the hill, which is certainly a good move in my opinion. You don't want to surrender the high ground to a team that has got the artillery advantage. Meanwhile, Dol Amroth sending out their cavalry. And interestingly enough, it looks as though Imladris is sort of hovering on the periphery with their own cavalry as well. So it looks as though we're going to split off into 2v2s. 1v1s, I should say. Dol Amroth facing off against the small but elite forces of Imladris. And then Umbar and Cardland going off against one another to see who can absorb the most pressure. I mean, overall I would give the cavalry advantage here to Imladris. They do have that spear cavalry, they have the knights. The Eldar Enway Heru Myro might just be shock cavalry, but it's still very powerful shock cavalry with that elven skill. Actually, there's 2 units of Knights of the Silver Swan. Even so, I'd still probably give the advantage to Imladris. Let's just go for a slightly slow charge here. 2 units of Lancers charging off into one another. The Eldar Enway, however, did have the slight wraparound there. And with their elven skill, I would imagine they're probably going to be the ones to come out on top of this fight. Meanwhile, over here we can see that Knights of the Silver Swan also going up against the Knights of the Gwathi Rockdoor. That's certainly going to go against Dol Amroth. Over on this side, however, the Imladris Sentinels will probably struggle a little bit more against the Swan Knights. The Swan Knights are dedicated melee cavalry, whereas the Sentinels are spear cavalry. Sort of the happy middle ground. Dol Amroth are not letting up though, they're still trying to pursue the Elven Cavalry, which is a bit of a mistake to my mind. Let's go back up to full 1 speed here, because these Knights of the Silver Swan, you really don't want to just be charging them into a force which is going to defeat them in melee. They're a big investment, and they can do immense damage off the charge to infantry, but you don't want to be throwing them in against Knights, because they're clearly not going to win that. Meanwhile, let's go and see what's going on up here. My mouse is dying slowly, and Numenorean Lancers going after the trebuchet here. Umbar realising the danger that this trebuchet could pose them if this turns into a protracted fight, which when Umbar and Carlin are facing off against one another, it's probably going to be a long engagement. They do get out of there, however, before the Wardens of Tyr and Gorthad manage to get a real bite onto them. Cardlin, how it is going to be a bit more of a choke point fight here by the looks of things. And Minas-Girithlin's sharpshooters, so it's mainly crossbows that Cardlin have, which means the range advantage is going to be Umbar, so Umbar should be able to get Cardlin to move closer to them and try and use that slightly elevated portion of ground. My mouse's clicks are really not doing so well right now. Meanwhile, Dol Amroth still have their cavalry, so they did back out a little bit, which in my mind is very wise. They don't need to rush into an engagement with this Imladris cavalry. They do have a significant numbers advantage here. But if they just take things slow, they should be able to overwhelm this Imladris army. This is a risky army to have brought from Dreezy, to my mind. It would work against a lot of lower tier forces, I think, because the Alderaanwe would just be able to hack their way through low tier units all day long. But Dol Amroth do have a little bit of quality about them here in this infantry line. They've got some AP, they've got some pikes, they've got some decent frontline troops, and then of course they've got the Talon Knights and the Haven Guard, which will be able to go toe to toe with the Imladris units. But it might come down to the cavalry here. If Dol Amroth throws away their cavalry, then it should go in favour of Imladris with the good play from those knights. Meanwhile, let's go and see what's happening here. The Umbar forces coming round from the rear. Ooh, and a frontal charge here from the warlords. That's a risky frontal charge as well. If those the sharpshooters did get several volleys off, well, at least one volley off into the Umbar knights. But they do force the crossbows into a full retreat, and you can actually see here that the crossbow corsairs are going to go around. So there are gaps here in the Cardlin line, and Umbar are the ones moving forward, which I'm actually kind of surprised about. They could have skirmished for a little longer, and the Castamir's Legion bearing the brunt of this. Numenorean Lancers are going to fall back. The trebuchet was firing. Umbar need to attack quickly, because if those crossbows get set, there's Minotaur Romen Guardians here as well. If the crossbows get set and continue to fire into this front line, it could be really ugly for Umbar. Having said that, they do have significantly better units in terms of infantry. These Greenwatch Garrison Spearmen are going to get butchered en masse by Castamir's Legion, and the pikes won't help all that much, I don't think. I think Umbar's weight of numbers is going to be enough here. Cardlin do have a numbers advantage, but I'm not sure that these pikes will be able to survive too long in melee if this infantry attack is properly backed up by ranged units. And Umbar do have the Belagire Archers and the Corsair Blackguards that they can use. You can see they're volleying into the Dunedain Captains and the Minas-Girithlan Swordsmen that are with them. This will be an interesting engagement. I can't imagine either side is going to come out of this looking too great. Cardlin's lack of cavalry might prove to be a bit of a problem for them, however, because these Numenorean Lancers are going to be harassing the back lines all the while, and this means Cardlin will have to keep units in reserve. Let's just slow things down a little bit here. Numenorean Lancers are going to go up around the flank. Cardlin, however, are taking the initiative here to try and flank around themselves, which might be a problem for Umbar. You can see, however, victory does seem certain for Umbar along the front line. The Castamir's Legion easily going to be able to defeat the Greenwatch Garrison Spearmen. It's one of the most lopsided fights you can expect to see. Greenwatch Garrison Spearmen getting around the flank, though. These Numenorean Lancers need to be careful, because the Cardlin crossbows are going to keep focusing them down. What's going on over on this portion of the map? Still a little bit cagey over on this side. Dol Amroth and Imladris not really sure what to do. I'm not sure Dol Amroth have any ranged units, actually, which is going to be a real problem for them. It means Dol Amroth are going to have to be the ones to move forward if the Imladris Elves decide to utilise their ranged advantage. Dol Amroth can't afford to hang around with Elven Archers all up in their business. These Warlords have taken some pretty substantial losses, but look at that trebuchet. A grazing blow, but if that gets a nice hit into the Castamir's Legion, this could turn this battle on its head. Now the Warlords of Umbar charging forth into the Minas-Girithlan sharpshooters. The Cardland crossbows are an integral part of their army. If you can deny them the ability to use them when they're needed, Cardland can end up struggling quite a bit. The frontline engagement is still happening, and the Greenwich Garrison spearmen are starting to lose unit models pretty quickly. These pole arms, they will be able to hold the Umbar infantry at bay for a time, thanks to the addition of the pikes and the fact that the spears have got pretty decent defense values, but you know, obviously eventually they're going to lose, which means Cardland needs to affect the fight in other ways, and that does mean the crossbows and the trebuchet. Right, this could be lethal, however. A rear charge into the front line, a nice hammer and anvil from the warlords of Umbar could hasten the demise of this front line, especially seeing as it's right where the Dunedain captains are. The one unit on the front line which can hold their own against Cardland, although that wasn't a particularly fantastic charge. And the presence of the pikes means that the Umbar general could fall as well. Númenorian lancers, giving those Greenwich Garrison footmen the runaround. There goes the Umbar general. Cavalry didn't really commit to that charge, and it showed. Númenorian lancers getting into the Miniscarithan sharpshooters and the Menotar Romen guardians, but the Menotar, of course, do have anti-cavalry of their own. That was a pretty decent hit. There was some friendly fire there, but the trebuchet is doing some real damage to this portion of the Umbar front line. Right down this line here. It's turned into a nice line battle here. The opportunities for flanking are few. There was one over here for Cardland, and the Miniscarithan spearmen are up here, killing off these crossbow corsairs. But I think the fact that Umbar was able to get their cavalry into the back lines of Cardland is probably what's going to decide this fight. If Cardland was able to fully commit to the front line over here, then they probably would have been able to hold the Umbar infantry in place long enough for the crossbows and the trebuchet to do their work. That was a horrible amount of friendly fire there. But as it is, they're having to commit resources, mainly the crossbow fire, I have to say, to try and deal with this cavalry. And they have killed the Umbar general, but that isn't going to be enough, I fear. And all the while, Umbar have had their own ranged units affecting the fight as well. The Corsair Blackguards have since joined the fray as well, adding their own expertise to the front line. We may as well go up to 1 speed as this happens. Right down the line. The trebuchet has been a bit of a loss so far. It's delivered too much friendly fire for it to be worth it. The Umbar cavalry is almost dead, but it has certainly done its job in keeping the crossbow's attention away from the Umbar front line. And slowly and surely the Cardland front line will fall. Meanwhile, let's go and see what's happening over here, because it looks as though Dol Amroth are now moving forward. They're going to lead the way with their knights, of course. Well, cavalry. They do need to be really careful, though. This Imladris army is interesting. What on earth happened there? That was the sound of a charge, but nothing actually was charging. The Gwathi Rockdor right in front of the army. The Eldarenwe Haru Quinga, the only archer units over here, amazingly enough. Obviously, the major weakness of this army is if it gets surrounded. And Dol Amroth, I think, seem to realise that, because they are spreading out as wide, well, much more wide than the Imladris formation. Getting into loose as well to try and prevent the Eldarenwe from getting as much value. Imladris are going to be trying to rely on their cavalry here, I think, to really punish the Dol Amroth forces. But Dol Amroth have got a lot of anti-cavalry units. They can't afford to leave that Haven Guard and the Talon Knights too far back, otherwise the cavalry will pick them off. Speaking of picking off with the cavalry, the Gwathi Rockdor charging through the trees, and the Attalon men-at-arms were leading the way without any sort of anti-cavalry support around them, and naturally this means the Imladris Knights will be able to take pot shots at the advancing Dol Amroth forces. As this advance is happening, let's just take a quick look at how things are going for Umbar. This has been a very grindy fight thus far between Cardland and Umbar, which is as expected considering the kind of factions that they are. Miniscarithan sharpshooters getting up on the hill now, however, with the Menotar Romen guardians trying to shoot with their crossbows along the Umbar front line. Umbar aren't going to look too healthy after this, and in fact the Wardens of Tirn Gorthad are trying to flank around. Yeah, half strength for Cardland. Eventually I think Umbar's quality is going to show, but they're not going to look too good after this, honestly. Cardland's front line is held off for a decent amount of time. Now, however, let's see how this fight goes, just in time to see a charge from the men-at-arms. Naturally, the Attalon men-at-arms, they're pretty good when they've got their armour upgrades, but they're going to be no match for the Imladris Guardians, who, when they have their armour upgrades, they're one of the finest infantry units, finest line infantry units in the game that aren't multiple HP. Over here, the Attalon men-at-arms facing off against the Eldarenwe Haru Vital, but Elven Spears, they may still have the spear malice, but they are still a very fine unit indeed. Now the Dora and Ernil pikemen are a bit of a fly in the ointment here, as they may be able to keep the elves at bay long enough to do some more substantial damage. And then there's some halberdiers. The Gwathi Rockdor are on the run, actually, from the Knights of the Silver Swan. Only 17 of them as well. I'm actually quite surprised about that. The Gwathi Rockdor could easily have defeated them. Well, actually, now I can see why. The Tirithea Wardens are on hand. And if Dol Amroth can get these spears to dish out some nasty damage to those High Elven Knights, Imladris need their cavalry to do a lot of heavy lifting here, I would imagine. I don't think they have the numbers required to truly deal with Dol Amroth, and indeed the Imladris Guardians, they're strong, but the weight of numbers that Dol Amroth have here, between the nice men-at-arms that they have on the front line, the bread and butter units, and then they also have those AP polearms, which do have quite a nice effect against Imladris, of course, with their heightened armour values. The Eldarenwe Heru Masil will be a tough nut to crack. And they'll do some nasty damage.
We have lost half of our men.
Umbar have since lost half their men. These Knights of the Silver Swan are shaken. That was a bit of a weak source charge into the back of the Eldarenwe, to be honest, and they will, of course, easily deal with them. Let's see how well this very strange army can do. The Eldarenwe Heru Myro are in the back lines of Dol Amroth at this point, and this is where this may very well prove to be a fatal mistake of Dol Amroth. I don't really know.
Mighty Lord, or a military genius can bring us victory from this disgrace.
I don't really know what he was thinking leaving these units so far back. It was so obvious that the Imladris cavalry would target them down, because none of these units have got particularly strong anti-cavalry, and they're going to try and sort of clump up here, try and absorb the charge as best they can, but they're still going to be able to cycle charge in and out of these elite Dol Amroths. I imagine he was trying to save them for the late game, but it's going to go very poorly for him here. The Imladris cavalry is going to be able to cycle charge them at will, and honestly, without the Haven Guard and the Talon Knights, this front line is starting to look much less secure now. You can see that the Dol Amroth infantry all along the line is breaking, so Imladris actually are going to probably win this. Initially it was looking pretty good, and over on this flank, to be fair, well, defeat now seems certain. All of these Eldarenwe units really towing the line. The first wave of the assault from Dol Amroth was pretty well constructed, but as time went on, their attackers started to fall apart because they were a little bit too slow to come forth with the second wave of the assault. Let's go and see what's happening over on this side. It looks as though Cardlan have been victorious over here, which I'm very surprised about. There's still some crossbow corsairs in the background. I'm not entirely sure how that happened. I guess Umbar just ran out of steam.
They have lost half their men.
Some of these Castamir's legion are starting to run away. I can only imagine it was the crossbows. When they got free and when they got up onto the higher ground and they started firing along the line, Umbar just couldn't deal with that. There are still some individual Umbar units alive, but yeah, Umbar's army has fallen apart. They do still have some individual units trying to save what they can for the late game, I would imagine. These Corsair Blackguards trying to deal with the Minas-Garithlin sharpshooters, but Cardlan managing to hold. Their infantry took a beating from Umbar early on, but they were able to hold out long enough for them to sort their back lines out, which, you know, that goes to show how effective the Cardlan units for holding the line can be. They were never going to win that in terms of pure damage, but they did a decent job. Decent enough for the crossbows to get into position. Looks like the Heru Quinga are out of ammunition, but of course, Elven Archers, when they're out of ammunition, are not that much worse than most factions' standard infantry units. Better than most, actually, in terms of the Eldarenwe Heru Quinga at any rate. Yeah, Dol Amroth's infantry line's starting to fall apart. The Tirithea Wardens don't really stand much of a chance anymore. The Halberdiers have done their best, but ultimately, even their AP and their phalanx is not going to be enough at this point. And you can see here, this was where Dol Amroth ultimately made their biggest mistake. They got a bit greedy, I think. They got a bit greedy in trying to save these units for the second fight that they thought they would be in, but you know, you can never assume that you're going to be the one to win the first battle, especially not when you're facing Imladris, I must say. When they've got an army as elite as this, the Haven Guard and the Talon Knights were needed on the front line to try and battle with all the Eldarenwe. But as it was, the Elven Cavalry was also used a little bit more wisely. I think the initial engagement certainly went against Dol Amroth, if only slightly. So Imladris are going to win here, and that means Imladris and Cardland are the armies with the most resources left to them. Dol Amroth will probably be hunted down to extinction, but Umbar will still have a presence on the field, and they may still be able to affect the outcome of the battle. Dol Amroth are also trying to get some units to bug out, and it's pikemen as well, so they won't be easily chased down by the Imladris cavalry, which is still just...
Only intervention by the Almighty Lord or a military genius can bring us victory from this disgrace.
Obviously, Dol Amroth's army, their surviving units are scattered all across the field at this point, and so as long as they aren't pikes, you'd have to imagine that Dreezy's cavalry is just going to hunt them down. Which is a wise move, because you can't really afford to let units like Talon Knights or Haven Knights be in the pocket for the late game, because Dol Amroth could still pull this out if they were. The Elder Enway Heru Myro. They do have the full charge bonus of 20, a lethal shot cavalry unit. Still some Imladris Sentinels around as well. This cavalry could be key in the late game as well, because Cardland, of course, really have no choice other than to try and bunker up. And I'm not sure whether or not... Well, yeah, these Heru Quingra have all got their swords out, so Imladris no longer have a ranged component to their army. Well, there goes Imrahil.
Our army is tiring.
And there goes the last of the Haven Guard. They didn't really do much of anything in this battle. They spent the entire time getting pummeled by cavalry. So, Cardland, it looks as though they are very content to just sort of hold their position. What's going on here? There's still a green triangle. Aha. It's a single Corsair Blackguard, and he was very quickly dealt with by what remains of the Dunedain captains, sans the armour upgrade. This trebuchet could be a very key part of the Cardland defence, because it would force Imladris to come to them, or at the very least it might do some additional damage. Imladris could of course go into loose formation, stretch themselves and try and make the inaccuracy of the trebuchet work for them, but I think the trebuchet should still have some ammunition. Key part of the defence as well. It did some nasty damage to this portion of the Umbar line, which presumably was the first part to fall. Some Cardland forces up on the hill over here. Umbar are still alive, although they would be well advised to not attack into the Cardland army. I don't know who I'd give the advantage to here. Probably Imladris, just because Cardland's infantry did take a real beating from Umbar. And while the crossbows might be able to do some damage, I'm not sure whether the Cardland infantry could hold the line for the length of time required again, especially against Elder Enway. We'll see. May as well go into ×2 speed, I guess, while the manoeuvring happens. It's possible that these Umbar units will be hunted down by the Cardland Greenwatch units here. Shaken? Yeah, they should rout fairly soon. They're clearly not in a decent place. Although it looks as though Cardland not going after the Umbar unit, so it's possible that Cardland and Umbar have come to a little bit of an understanding. They see the might of the Eldar Enway amassing before them, and they're going to try and work together a little bit. Such is the way of a free-for-all, I suppose. But it looks as though Imladris, sensing that this is the case, are almost certainly going to try and dispose of Umbar before they can meet up with Cardland, and this one unit of Talon Knights, which is still alive, is also going to be hunted down. Not what I would call a balanced army from Imladris, but it has worked for them so far. A small but elite army. So meanwhile, I mean, Umbar don't really have anything that can defend against cavalry charges, because those crossbows, you can see from the fact that they've pulled out their harpoons, that they have got no ammunition left. Now the Balagai archers do, and I'm actually surprised that the Harumaru pulled out of that charge. Because honestly, if you deprive Umbar of their Casimir's Legion, that's their one melee unit that they've got left gone. They're going to try and hold up in here, in the hills, possibly. Honestly, they could, if, you know, Cardland and Umbar have sort of come to an arrangement, then they could force Imladris to come to them. Imladris don't have anything in terms of ranged units left, and Umbar have got their Balaguer archers, Cardland have got their Treb. Meanwhile, these Talon Knights, Dol Amroth's elite units have been bullied so far by Imladris. No rest for the wicked, I suppose, but there are still individual units, I think, still alive. These Doran Ernil pikemen are just in the background over here. There's a couple of red triangles here. So yeah, Dol Amroth have got their polearms with their backs to cliffs to make sure that the cavalry can't charge them. Dol Amroth is still a factor in this battle then. What's going on here? Imladris Sentinels, they're going to get a downhill charge into the Castamir's Legion. Nice charge as well. This is going to be the end of the Imladris Sentinels, you would imagine, but the Castamir's Legion, getting rid of them would mean that Imladris' infantry have got an overwhelming advantage if it comes down to just a match of pure muscle. Again, it's a back-to-the-wall job here. The Imladris player must certainly be feeling the pressure at this point, because everyone's forces are certainly going to be amassed against him. His army held up really well to the Dol Amroth assault. He also is the only player with any cavalry to speak of left alive. So it certainly gives him some leverage there. Coming into the closing stages of this fight now, though. How will this work out? Well, it is, I think, going to come down to whoever wins out of the newfound alliance of men over here and Imladris. I don't think Dol Amroth will be able to win this no matter what. If Umbar and Cardland win, they'll have some ranged units left alive, which they can just use to shoot them from a distance. If Imladris win, the quality of their units is certainly going to be too much for Doran Ernil pikemen, especially once they get surrounded. So, ×2 speed. ×6 speed. The final battle has to begin fairly soon, I would imagine. Umbar are sort of using Cardland as a shield here. If I were the Cardland player, I would definitely not be standing for any of that. I would be getting Umbar right on the front lines with me. Let's see here. Oh, here we go. I mean, clearly Imladris wants to disable that trebuchet. But honestly, it doesn't matter. No matter what Imladris do here, Cardland and Umbar will have the ranged advantage. I can't believe Umbar's using Cardland as a shield in such a shameless way. If I were Cardland, I'd be tempted to turn my crossbows around and just mow them down. No mercy. Umbar's halberds are also getting back into position. There's no way. Not through that little gap. If you lose your knights, it's all over, Treasy. Oh, those crossbows, lethal. You can't afford to buzz around for too long, otherwise those crossbows will really punish you. The Eldarenwe Harumairo are now completely trapped. You would imagine that this is going to be the end of the Imladris Lancers. The Miniscarithan sharpshooters, their armour piercing will help them here. But more significantly, I think the pikes are now on hand. So this is going to be the end of this Eldarenwe unit. Waithy Rockdor also moving. Cardland doing a very good job at moving the trebuchet with these pikes, making it very difficult for him. The Imladris forces... It's so clear what Umbar's doing here. Cardland needs to just... Honestly, if I were Cardland, I would just get out of the way of this. Because now they're right in between here, and this is prime backstabbing territory, this. Umbar could turn on Cardland in an instant. Will there be betrayal? That would be a brutal betrayal, I have to say. Still not sure how this is going to go. I mean, this could go to any one of these three teams, I would imagine. Dol Amroth are also, I think, shifting their, well, what's left of their army across the field now. They don't really need to fear the Imladris cavalry too much anymore. The Gwathi Rockdor is still here, but... I think Imladris are going to be on the attack now. If they're going to attack, they should make it now, because Cardland are out of position, and if their pikes are out of position, Cardland's infantry will crumble in the face of Eldarenwe. Umbar is swinging out wide. I don't know, the quality of Imladris might just be too much here. At least against Cardland. Oh, and they do still have some ammunition. That's pretty key. The Heru Quinga can get some nice volleys off, then I would imagine Imladris should be okay. They are attacking uphill, but it's only into basic Cardland units. It's a shame there are no Thieves of Tharbad here. They've got a little bit more skill than most Cardland infantry. So here we go, and Umbar are going to be quite content, I think, to let both these sides bleed one another to death, which is a betrayal of sorts for Cardland. Wardens of Tir Gorthad not really getting their pikes down in time, and in close quarters the Heru Masil will rip them apart, and the Trebuchet also wasn't able to make its destination. There's still some Dol Amroth Talon Knights here. Interestingly enough, I think Dol Amroth has now allied themselves with Imladris. The two battles that happened at the start have now got the two alliances together. How very strange. Victory is a distinct possibility for these very depleted Imladris Guardians against a force of far numerically superior Miniscarithlan swordsmen, but I think really it's the Heru Masil more than anything else. Cardland just don't have anything that can match up to them at this point. I don't think anyone on the field has got anything which can match up to them. And now we can see that the Gwathi Rockdor brutally charging into the crossbow Corsairs, and as soon as they are dead, that will be, well, they still have the halberds, I suppose, but now the Heru Quinga are over here. Imladris Guardians moving in. They'll be able to stand up to this Umbar Arrow Storm a little bit better than most other units with their heightened armour values and their shields. Oof, this is going to be nasty as well. The Gwathi Rockdor. Once upon a time, these were just multiple HP Lancers and were exceedingly underwhelming. But now they've taken their rightful place as Knights. Talon Knights are also moving forward. So Umbar, despite trying to use Cardland as a human shield, has ultimately failed in their endeavours. These Elder Enway, Heru Masil, they've really been MVPs. Dol Amroth had nothing that could stand up to them, nor has Cardland. Admittedly, they've not really faced a truly elite unit like themselves. What's going on up here? Miniscarithlan Sharpshooters with their AP are able to, well, they will eventually be able to tidy up these Elder Enway Heru Fatal, but now the Gwathi Rockdor and Cardland's backlines. These Miniscarithlan Sharpshooters could prove to be an issue. I'm actually surprised that Gwathi Rockdor decided to charge into those Sharpshooters over there when these are the ones that still have ammunition left. But I think at this point it's fairly clear that Imladris are probably going to win. They've still got their Guardians over there. Talon Knights are still alive. And yeah, I mean, Dol Amroth probably would have been better served trying to help out and sort of going 3-on-1 with Imladris here in the late game. As it were, the Talon Knights assisted Imladris in their conquest. Yeah, the Heru Masil were just way too strong for everything they fought. Menontar Romen Guardians are still alive, but they aren't going to be enough either. Now the crossbows have all been caught in melee. Let's see what's happening down here. Umbar being tidied up. Imladris Guardians. Belagair Archers still trying to shoot, but again, Imladris are going to be better at dealing with this than every other Elven faction. So that isn't going to be nearly enough to sway this battle. I think Umbar is going to realise this soon, that running away with these two units of Belagair Archers is going to be a completely fruitless endeavour. They will run out of ammo long before they kill off all of Imladris' army. And naturally in melee they won't stand a chance against all this Elder Enway. It's been a while since we've seen an Elder Enway army like this. Ever since they've been limited to one before the red limit. This has been something you haven't seen, but Dreezy has made it work. Made it work very well. If you don't have any units of quality that you can send up against an Elder Enway army like this, pure numbers probably won't do it for you, as Dol Amroth learned. They really needed the support of the Haven Guard and the Talon Knights earlier on. They needed the... Honestly, the Haven Knights probably would have been exceedingly useful as well to match up with the great Gwathi Rockdor and defeat them. Not a great charge. They had to go through their own units, but Cardland have been largely destroyed. Dol Amroth probably lasted longer than Cardland here, but ultimately it doesn't really matter. Imladris' power was too much. I don't think Imladris even lost a great deal of their army, to be honest, which is the truly scary thing. Their cavalry is obviously looking a little bit haggard, and individual unit models have disappeared from each unit, but overall I think all of the units they deployed have survived this battle, which is a scary thing indeed. Elven dominance. Again, most people say that the elves aren't that strong. Well, I think this certainly proves otherwise.
Or a military genius can bring us victory from this disgrace.
Harukwinger are just going to mop up what's left of the Tirithea Wardens, and of course, Imladris' dominance is clear at this point. The betrayal of Dol Amroth is complete. And we're going to see the epic defeats now. There we go.
He flees the field of battle and abandons his men.
You are going to do the same soon, Umbar. It's going to be the end. Yeah, very dominant performance here from Imladris. They did really well. Very interesting composition as well. It just goes to show that going over the red limit can certainly help you in certain cases. Obviously the most clear example of that recently has been the Blacklock Engineers for Erebor. When you have two of them, it can be a truly daunting prospect to go through those crossbow bolts. But here, Imladris also proving that a small army can also be incredibly effective. Only 727 men deployed, a fraction of that Cardland deployed, but they only lost 321 units. They killed 1,741 men. Umbar getting a decent amount of kills as well, but that does come largely due to the fact that they were facing off against Cardland, who had by far and away the largest army. Dol Amroth, however, getting bullied really by Imladris early on. They initially, when the first wave went in, they had a numbers advantage, but they really needed their cavalry to do work against the Imladris infantry, and ultimately the Imladris cavalry got the upper hand. And then, of course, their elites were just lagging way too far behind the main army, and the Haven Guard and the Talonites were sorely needed on that front line to match up with the Eldar Haru Masil and the Imladris Guardians. Let's see, though, what did the damage for Umbar. Corsair Blackguards doing very well, obviously getting a lot of kills on that front line for Cardland. Didn't help them in the end, though. Cardland's front line emerged from that victorious. They managed to tank all that damage, which is impressive. Elsewhere, you know, there's a few units that got over 100. The Castamir's Legion doing very well on the front line. Of course, Belagair Archers not so well. You know, they were in the late game, of course. The cavalry as well. You'd kind of want bigger numbers than that. I can understand why the cavalry did what they did, and they did distract the crossbows for a time, but they really needed to be a little bit more decisive with their charges, I think. Cardland's pikes were in the way for too long, and that allowed them to be focused down a little bit. Belagair Halberds doing well in places. Crossbow Corsairs, one unit of them doing well. I think Umbar's initial engagement, you know, Cardland obviously won that, so despite the fact that they got more kills, Cardland were able to tank that with their much larger army, but obviously Imladris by far and away the MVP with their tiny army, and you're able to get a lot of kills. So yeah, hope you enjoyed this free-for-all on the North Downs. Next, I think, well, I don't know, I've got a choice of things. I could go back to another siege on the Grey Havens, which I have. I've got a few other bits and pieces I could do as well, so we'll see. I might also do something new within the next couple of days, or maybe even before this. We'll see, something completely different from Total War in general, so I'm sure people will absolutely hate it, but who knows. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.